Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Voices from the Mausoleum. In today's edition of 5 Influential Horror Movies, I have Preston Fassel, and we're going to talk about his 5 influential horror movies and why he chose them. Yeah. All right, Preston, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Preston Fassel. I'm a novelist and biographer. I have two published books out, two fiction books, and then my third book, which is my first nonfiction book, was just released in December. It's a biography of Sleazewood Express magazine founder Bill Landis, and it's called Landis: The Story of a Real Man on 42nd Street. And then I'm also the managing editor for DailyGrindhouse.com.
All right, nice. Yeah, and I'll link all of Preston's stuff below. His socials, a link to his book, and all that kind of stuff will be listed below. So did you have like a particular order, or do you want me just to kind of go in the order that I have in front of me?
You know, I forgot which five we talked about. December turned into such a crazy month.
Oh, I
So this
know.
is going to be kind of a cool thing for me to go back and remember what
Yeah.
my five influences were.
Okay. I can kind of, if you want, because I've done this with other lists, because especially because the ones that you gave me were so vastly different from each other, we can kind of go from lighter to the heavier if you want. And
Sounds
and
good.
then that way we can just go in that order. So I think probably based off of your list, I would say maybe the lightest one on there, maybe Night of the Comet.
Yeah, I love Night of the Comets.
Yeah.
So when I was in college, I used to write the short stories that ran in our campus's literary journal.
Okay.
And they were all about the people who worked and went to theaters on 42nd Street in the 1970s.
Okay.
And they were all parts of this novel that I was working on, and like these short stories were kind of testing grounds for different ideas and characters that I was then building into this book that I since have called The Theater Story.
Okay.
I never finished it. I worked on this thing all through college, and then I kept working on it after college,
Okay.
and it got up to like 250,000 words, and there was like 25 main characters, and nothing had happened. And I didn't want to give up on this thing, and I just kept adding and adding and going back and revising, and there was just something off about it. There was just
Okay.
something that I just couldn't capture with it. And one night I had gotten Night of the Comets in my Netflix DVD. This was still back in the days when you sent away from in the mail.
Right. Yeah.
And I can't remember how I ended up with this on the list in the first place, but I had gotten to the point where I had just forgotten what order I'd put stuff in, and I was just
Yeah.
kind of going, stuff comes in, it's a surprise. Okay, cool, I put this thing
Yeah.
on there. So Night of the Comet comes in, and I put it in, and I watch it, and I realized this is the story that I've been trying to tell. This is what that theater story should have looked like and felt like, and
Okay.
this is how the character should have been. And the next day, I decided to just completely scrap it and
Wow. Okay.
completely start over from scratch. And that is what eventually set me on the road to writing my first book, Our Lady of the Inferno, which actually got published, which actually was my foot in the door for
Okay.
being a professional published horror writer. And I actually based one of the characters in that story on Kelly Maroney's character,
Okay.
Samantha, in the movie.
Yeah.
And if I had never seen Night of the Comets, I think I would still be working on that theater story. I would still be
Yeah.
adding and adding to it. And I'd be like this Henry Darger guy right now with like a 1 million word book piled up in my closet somewhere.
Right. Yeah. I had actually seen Night of the Comet a really long time ago. So I did rewatch it to kind of refresh. And it is a really fun movie. I didn't remember maybe like as fun as it was. I remembered it being kind of cheesy, but I didn't remember enjoying it as much as I did rewatching it. So I'm glad that I rewatched it. It is a fun movie. That's crazy to think about though, that you worked that long on something and seeing that one movie. Yeah. That's
It,
crazy.
it was just this weird, amazing feeling. It was
Yeah.
simultaneously kind of disheartening because I realized like I just got to put this thing away
Oh
and just like
yeah.
call it a loss. But at the same time, I was just so exhilarated and excited that like I felt like I'm finally on the right track now.
Yeah, I bet that was a really good feeling. Yeah, that movie was a lot of fun. I think I have a hard time sometimes with horror that's kind of meant to be comical. I think it sometimes can be a really, really hard balance. And I feel like considering the time frame this movie came out and the people that were in it and other things that they did, I feel like it did a really good job of balancing both of these really uncomfortable, weird moments with these like really fun moments too. And it was really well balanced for what it was, which I appreciated because that's kind of hard to find.
Yeah, I mean you're absolutely right. So many horror comedies I feel
Yeah,
really lack horror. They're just really comedies that people have pumped buckets of blood into so they can
sure.
call it a horror comedy. It's
Yep.
very hard and very rare to walk that line. And that's something I love about Night of the Comet is that it knows what it's doing and it pulls it
Yeah.
off with this real like lightning in a bottle of plum.
And then I guess like the next light one which is kind of still kind of dark when you really watch it, especially as an adult, would be Beetlejuice was on your list.
Yes. So this was really one of the first horror films that I ever saw.
Okay.
It came out when I was still very young, and
Yeah.
it's the weirdest damn thing. My dad hates horror movies. My
Okay.
mom absolutely loves horror movies, and like a
Okay.
lot of my favorite horror movies I first saw with my mom as a
Sure.
teenager, and like she and I would rent stuff and like go to the theater sometimes. But
Yeah.
a lot of the big influential horror movies in my life are because my dad showed them to me.
Okay, that's
And
good.
like
Yeah.
yeah, my dad showed me Monster Squad, he showed me Ghostbusters, and he showed me Beetlejuice.
Yeah.
And I saw this when I was like maybe 3 or 4 years old,
Wow.
and it scared the ever living hell out of me
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just absolutely traumatized me.
Yeah.
And then I kept asking to watch it. And
Okay.
like that was
Okay.
that like
Okay.
it set this pattern for me for the longest time where
Yeah.
I would have this like kind of teasing around the fire relationship with horror where I would like put my hand in and get burned but want to keep going back for more. And Beetlejuice really set that template for me
Yeah.
where I would get scared and then not want to watch anything scary for the longest time
Yeah.
and then go back and expose myself to it more.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I really came to appreciate it more and
Yeah.
see it on more of a deeper level. A lot of the thematic stuff in there, this kind of like Kafka-esque afterlife bureaucracy. I
Sure.
just love that conceptual look at the afterlife. As a matter of fact, when I started working as a teenager and DVDs came around, Beetlejuice was the very first movie I bought with my own money, where I went out myself and like paid for it with what I had
Yeah.
made. And I
Oh,
remember
yeah.
coming home and watching it on the computer because we didn't have a DVD player yet.
Oh,
And
wow.
I remember obsessively freeze framing that scene in the waiting room, trying to
Oh,
pick out all of the different ghosts and figure out what had happened to them and figure out
yeah.
what their backstories were.
Yeah, I remember doing that a lot too. I don't remember how old I was the first time I saw Beetlejuice, but I know the first time I saw it, it was very uncomfortable for me. And watching it as you get older, you appreciate it. Watching it as a kid, it's kind of scary and uncomfortable. Watching it as a teenager, it becomes a little funny and still a little weird. But then as you grow and the more that you watch it, you notice things about it. You appreciate different things about it, and it's interesting because I actually was thinking, I don't remember where this came up or why this came up, but I haven't actually seen it in a really while. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I had kind of forgotten some of the vulgarity that's in it because I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, this is like an easy introduction to horror for kids, and I'm forgetting about the part where he like grabs himself and he cusses and he says all these things, and I had just like, because I had seen it in so many different stages and I didn't notice that stuff when I was younger. But then as an adult, I'm like, oh, it's kind of raunchy.
I know. And like so much like family and like kids entertainment from the 80s, you go back and look at it now and it's like they were just doing that.
I
It's like
know.
Disney did like their like Watcher in the Woods and something wicked this way comes and it's like all the other family filmmakers were like, oh, we can get away with putting adult stuff in kids movies now. And so you've got like, I remember
Yeah,
Beetlejuice, there were toys, there was a cartoon, like this was marketed
yeah.
to families and kids, and here's Beetlejuice grabbing himself and dropping F-bombs and
I know.
nobody thought anything of it at the time.
I definitely did. And I didn't even remember it. And even seeing it as an adult, it being a while, I didn't remember that. I remember all of the other stuff. Like I remember the girls in the little house, and I remember, him being kind of rough around the edges in general. That's kind of his whole character. And I watched the animated series. I was like familiar with those things, but I was like, I don't think he says that. And I remember looking it up and being like, oh no, he does say that. And and it really, like, I think it kind of, again, is just kind of changes the experience for you when you notice things like that, because it's really funny. The stuff that he says is very funny. And I agree. I like the concept of the afterlife in the waiting room. And I remember like trying to figure out what was going on with everybody too. And that's definitely a really good movie. And it's funny because I always say that like horror is subjective. So whatever, everybody's got a different perspective of things that make them uncomfortable, things that scare them, what they consider horror. And I don't know that I would have, and you're 100% right. Beetlejuice is absolutely a horror movie, but it's just funny to think about. It's not really marketed that way. And a lot of people don't really think about it like that, but it is. I mean, in essence, it is. It's, I mean, definitely a darker movie. So that was fun. I like that movie a lot. I'm trying to think of I guess next we'll do, Ringu was the other one.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah,
I first heard about this on internet message boards in the lead up to the American remake coming out,
sure.
because there was this viral marketing campaign with the American remake where it was almost like this ARG, where like they were actually leaving copies of the videotape in places, and this
Oh,
yeah, it was really cool. Like I
yeah,
wish they still did stuff like this. They were actually leaving copies of the cursed video in like stadiums and movie theaters, and
yeah.
they had these fake websites set up. Like
Okay,
originally, there was a subplot in the movie where Chris Cooper was going to play this. I think he was a convicted murderer, there, a
okay,
convicted pedophile that Naomi Watts' character was interviewing for a news story, and like at the
okay.
end of the movie, she was going to give him the tape, and that was going to be the way she passed it on. And
Oh,
they had this website set up where it was like this guy's like I'm innocent blog from prison, and I can't remember. Like I think they had one for the resorts that she goes to. They had this whole like world built up around it, and
yeah.
so I found out about this movie coming out through that, and I thought,
Okay.
oh, that sounds like a really cool concept.
Mhm.
And because I was an insufferable teenage hipster, when I found out that it was a remake of a foreign film, I was like, I've got to see the original first
Yeah,
because the original's always better. I'm
yeah,
16 and I'm insistent that, oh, the book is always better, the original is always
yeah,
better.
yeah.
And I could not find a copy because at that time the J horror boom had not really come to the United States yet.
Okay.
And so I ended up finding in the like weirdest corners of the internet, I think it
Mhm.
was called Ring World, and it was a message board filled with people who were just obsessed with the original Ring series because
Okay.
by this time in Japan, they made a whole bunch. There'd been a TV movie,
There's a
there'd been
bunch.
like a TV miniseries, and yeah, and there was just like all these people fixated on it, and it was
Sure.
Japanese people who spoke English, and then also American expatriates in Japan and Americans with like satellites. And I made friends with a bunch of people there, and I found this person who was an American living in Japan, and he had this bootleg ring set up. And his
Okay.
sister lived in the States, and he would bootleg stuff, send it to his sister to get it into the country,
Okay.
and then his sister would distribute it for him. And so I got my hands via this brother sister duo
Yeah.
all of these J horror movies before the J horror boom really
They
happened
hit.
in
Yeah.
America. Because I saw that original Ring and I was just like, wow, I had never really seen a foreign horror film before. I had seen a
Mhm.
few like arty movies, but never really a foreign horror movie. And this
Sure.
like opened my eyes to this whole new realm of overseas horror. And it was like America and England are not the only places making stuff like
Sure.
this.
Yeah.
And like I said, I was 16 at the time. It just blew my mind, and so I started buying all of these bootleg VHSs off of this guy. And
Yeah.
by the time I graduated high school, had like a like arm's length of VHS tapes that I got off this guy, and that kind of segued me into all of these other bootleggers who were
Yeah.
doing stuff like exploitation movie bootlegging or like underground movie bootlegging. And I joke with my wife that I had like whole like spy style networks of bootleggers that I was in contact with.
Yeah.
And once places like Vinegar Syndrome and Severin came around, they started shutting these people down
Oh,
because
sure.
now all of a sudden there was money to be lost back in the '90s and early 2000s. It's like, who cares if some kid in
Yeah.
Oklahoma is buying like a third generation dub of a Coffin Joe movie or something? But
Sure.
oh, now we're coming out with the 3 DVD box set. We got to shut them down. But
Sure.
starting with Ring, for about probably a good 8 years or so, I was a dedicated purchaser of films of dubious provenance, and that really, opened my eyes to a whole bunch of different types of horror and movies, and it was all because of the Japanese Ring.
Yeah, that's really cool. So what did you end up thinking of the American compared to the Japanese?
I like the American one better.
Did you? I didn't
Yeah,
expect you to say that.
I think that Sadako coming out of the TV is scarier in the original,
Yeah,
versus the
I
Davy
agree.
Chase Samara. But I really think that's there. I really think that the original Ring is so culturally specific to Japan. I feel like if you grew up immersed in this culture,
Yeah,
that it has more meaning for a Japanese native viewer versus an
okay.
American, where it's more of this kind of informed acceptance of it. Like something that really struck me was just how readily and how easily everybody in the original accepts that there are ghosts. And so,
Sure.
like, I talked to the
Yes.
people on the Ring World Forum, and they explained to me that in Japan, it's very common for the average person on the street to believe in the supernatural. And like, if you grab somebody on the street in Japan, there's like a 60-70% chance you tell them you saw a ghost. They'll be like, okay, cool, I've seen a ghost too.
Right.
Versus America is a much more skeptical culture. It's a much more kind of up in the air thing here. And there's just all of these very small, but also very, at the same time, big aspects of the original Ring where I feel like it's more profound to a Japanese viewer who has that cultural context. And I feel like, what's his name? Gore Verbinski. He really did a great job of interpreting that to an American movie and
Yeah.
making it something that is at once faithful to the source material while also being a very Western film that has more of that kind of gut impact.
Yeah, and I think like and this is I feel like this is pretty common in Japanese and Korean horror. I feel like a lot of times their stuff is just so much more atmospheric or subtle, whereas
Mm-hmm.
American horror tends to go for the jumps and the frequent scary stuff. And you become like a lot of times it becomes about walking this line between like you become desensitized to the scary portion and they don't linger as long because they're happening so fast. And I think that like, seeing the Japanese one, which I'm pretty sure I saw the American one first. But then, of course, once I saw The Grudge and I learned that there was a Japanese version of that, then it kind of took me to learning the Japan or going to see the Japanese version of The Ring and the originals. And I think that that horror it just hits so differently, even as an American, somebody who's like seen. And I feel like they do horror a lot. I guess in most instances, I feel like it's done better because it tends to linger, like it gets in your skin, like the discomfort and the questioning and not knowing what's going on. And I felt the same way with, I don't know if you've seen, you probably have, but the original Pulse. So
Yes.
yeah, Pulse is
I have it right here. I found it at the
yeah,
dollar
yeah.
store a couple weeks ago.
Yes, yes, yes. So I saw the American one first. And it's so interesting because they carry this their message is really close to being the same and then it's told almost completely different. And I felt so much more I guess invested in what was going on when I watched the original. The American is still good. I like it. I think it did fine. But it's just for some reason it's just something more about the atmosphere and the storytelling and the way that these characters interact with each other in the original. Like it just leaves you feeling that hopelessness that they feel. And it just lingers. Like it lingers so much longer than the American remakes of pretty much any of those. I feel the same way. But yeah, I actually really did I really did like the Ringu. Like I really did like that a lot. And I think it's a much slower burn than the American one, but I think the payoff is still really high.
Oh
So
yeah.
I really like that one a lot too. I'm a big fan of Japanese and Korean horror in general. Like I just feel like it just is so it hits me so much more like harder, I guess. Like it just I don't know. It just like I said, it gets in my skin and it leaves me like really thinking or like really uncomfortable for days sometimes. And I love that. Yeah, no, I really did actually like I think I like the American version of the Ring probably for just very different reasons. I think I like just very different things about them. But I do think that as far as the pace and like being, I guess, scarier more often, I do think the American one kind of does that a little bit more because you see more quickly, I guess, like all of the scares and stuff. Um, and it didn't, I don't feel, the other one was a little bit of a slower burn. Yeah, so I guess we'll go into the next one, which would be, I think I'm going to get the order right on the first try. Let's see. Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly.
So I found Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly
Mhm.
completely sight unseen in
Okay.
a VHS bargain bin at this place called
Oh, wow.
Supermarket Warehouse in the town where I grew up in Oklahoma.
Okay.
And you could find anything at this place. You would not think that a grocery store, video store
Yeah.
in a small town in early 2000s Oklahoma would carry the stuff that they did, but they had everything. That's where I first saw Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. That's where
Oh,
I
okay.
first rented Maniac from.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember just like so many things I
Yeah.
originally found there. And they started bringing DVDs in. And I had friends from high school who worked there,
Okay.
and I found out from them what they were doing was if a movie had not been rented at least once within the past year, it got pulled from the shelf, popped in
Okay.
the bargain bin, and that's where they made more room for the DVDs. And
Oh, okay.
so and they were getting rid of VHSs with like a 4 for 20 special or like 5 for like 20 special. And so I would just go in there and just like scoop up armloads of VHSs because
Mhm.
the majority of them were horror movies.
Yep.
And in my mind at the time, I could never have foreseen the like Arrow, Shout Factory,
Yeah.
Severin world that we live in now. I was 100% convinced that if I did not rescue these movies and preserve them and keep them, that nobody was ever going to see them again.
Yeah.
And I saw it as like my 17-year-old me's mission in life to preserve all of these old horror and exploitation movies.
Okay.
And one of these movies is this movie, Mumsy, Nanny, Sonny, and Girly.
Mhm.
And it is this British movie about this wealthy, insane family that lives in a manor house out in the boonies, and they kidnap bums and hippies and like societal dropouts and bring them back to this manor house and force them to participate in this really crazy, elaborate role playing game where they are the perfect family.
Yep.
And if anybody refuses, they get killed in these weird rituals themed around playground games.
Mhm.
And their latest quarry decides to start turning the family against one another, and it kind of becomes the Addams Family meets the Beguiled. And one, I had no idea where the hell this thing came from. I could
Sure.
find virtually no information about it. And the star actress in it, Vanessa Howard,
Mhm.
you can tell she thinks she's going to win the BAFTA for this. Like she
Yeah.
goes for the fences. This is one of the best, sincere, dramatic
Yeah.
performances I've seen in a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it was shot on location at this real castle in England called Oakley Court.
Okay.
And I was just fascinated by the setting in the movie because they go all through this place. It had been converted after World War II into public housing. The last person to own it had bequeathed it, if I recall correctly, to the British Crown. And so it became legally the property of the United Kingdom, and they turned it into public housing. And they were also having Hammer and Bray Films come out there and allowing them to use it to shoot horror movies. But while you've got these camera crews there, there's also people living there at the same time.
Oh, right.
And so for this movie, by this point, it had gotten nominally cleared out, and they let the director, Freddie Francis, just have free reign to go anywhere he wanted in this castle turned public
Oh,
housing and film.
okay.
And just watching this, I was like, what is this place? Because the architecture is really strange, and there's like you'll have one room that's like super opulent with a pipe organ in it and like this majestic staircase coming down. And then like
Yeah.
somebody will turn a corner and there's just like a tiled, cheap, like gas station looking bathroom there. And it's just
Yeah.
really strange. And I was
Yeah.
super captivated by the location and
Yeah.
wondering, what are these people's backstories? What is this place? And then just thought that Vanessa Howard's performance was just one of the most startling things I had seen in a non mainstream film.
Sure.
And I wondered for years and years what ever happened to this woman. And one day, it would have been about 2012, 2013,
Okay.
I just randomly Googled her on my lunch break. I was working as an optometric assistant at the time, and I found an obituary for her.
Oh,
And the obituary says, like, Vanessa Howard Chartoff, ex-wife of Rocky producer Robert Chartoff, dead at 62.
oh,
And it's like there's this whole missing space here because I knew that she had this brief career
yeah,
as an almost scream queen in late 60s, early 70s Brit
yeah,
horror. And then she disappears and then pops up dead relatively young years later after
yeah,
having married the dude who made the Rocky movies. And I
yeah,
was just like, what happened?
yeah.
And not long after that, I was at a horror convention,
Okay,
and Rue Morgue magazine had a booth there,
okay.
and the series of thoughts goes through my head. I think to myself, if you're writing for an outlet, if you have like some name behind you, you could like find out what happened to her. You could do this whole journalistic investigation,
Yeah.
find people who knew her, find family members of hers, and you could find out what happened to her and write her story. And
Huh.
so I just walk up to the Rue Morgue booth. My only writing experience at this point was writing for my college's magazine and writing for an optometric trade journal. And I had one of my optometry trade journal business cards in my wallet,
Oh,
and I just pull it out and I put it in the hand of the guy at the booth. And I'm like, my name's Preston Fassel. I write for an optometry magazine and I've got a story for you. And I lay out the whole thing about Vanessa Howard. And
okay.
I think to myself, okay, you just told this intern your whole idea, and maybe he's going to talk to an
Oh
editor,
no.
maybe he
Yeah.
won't. But, at least you did it. At least you tried.
Yeah.
And the guy says, this sounds pretty cool. Let's talk. And he hands me his business card, and it's Dave Alexander, who at the time was the editor in chief of Rue Morgue magazine. And I had
Oh,
just pitched this story to the EIC. And we got in touch via email.
yeah.
And he said that he didn't really think that this was the right story for Rue Morgue, but he said, you clearly know your stuff. Just the way that you write your emails, I can tell you're a solid writer.
Yeah.
Let's have you start reviewing DVDs for the magazine. And that was my foot in the door for
Yeah.
being a horror writer. That's where I got started out. The very first thing that I had published about horror cinema was a review of another movie that Vanessa Howard was in with Peter Cushing called Laser Killer.
Okay.
And if I had not pulled this VHS out of the bargain bin at Warehouse Video,
None of
I
that
might,
would
yeah, it was like this butterfly effect of weird British smut.
Yeah, that's I actually had not heard of this one, so I had to watch it I had to watch it. So I watched it for the first time, and it was so funny because I remember thinking at the end of it that I really liked it, but I don't know if I could explain why. Like if I had to, if I had to say, I think it's so funny because like it kind of reminds me, and this is a bit of a stretch, but hear me out. I feel like it kind of reminds me of like a classier Texas Chainsaw Massacre of like this crazy ass family that like sometimes you get kind of so like you get kind of sucked in and you forget that they're crazy. Like there are these moments in between where they're like, they're knitting or they're talking to each other like normal people, and then there's these moments where you're like, oh, that's right, they're nuts. Like you kind of forget because you get kind of invested in them and wanting to see where this is going and what's going on with this other guest that they're not showing anymore. Like you start wondering about all of these pieces and what's going to happen. And it's interesting because like I actually, to be honest, watching the very beginning of it, I actually thought that it was going to go in a very different direction with the brother and sister because there's some like incestuous notes in the very beginning. And then it kind of like really went away from that. And then it just, I don't know, like I feel like it's one of those things that I watched and I had no idea what to expect literally the entire time. And I think that's also part of why I liked it. But all I could think is this is like a much more sophisticated version of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it's like it's nothing alike. It has like very subtle, things in common, but that's all I could think was like I did enjoy it. I really liked the movie a lot, but it was very hard for me to think about why. I still don't really know, to be honest, but that's what I kept thinking was much more sophisticated Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But it was a fun movie. I think there's a lot of entertainment value, and I think that the location definitely adds a lot to what's going on because it is a very like because everything does look so vastly different depending on which part of the building and even the outside. Like there's parts of outside that are very manicured and very elegant looking, and then there's parts that look like abandoned buildings and broken up, foliage and like I don't know, like it's so crazy. But I think that kind of adds to that pull, like back and forth of this family's very normal. Oh wait, no, they're not. Like it's just an interesting divide, which I really liked a lot. And I guess that takes us to your last one, which I left this one last on purpose, which is Poor Pretty Eddie.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
another Oklahoma origin story here. So
Okay.
I would have been 16 or 17. I wish I could remember what winter this was, but this big storm rolls in and they end up canceling school for like 3 or 4 days. And it's at like 6 o'clock at night. It's dark outside. There's ice coming down, and they come on the news and they say, schools are closed due to inclement weather.
Okay.
Roads are too dangerous. It's too cold. And I'm a 16, 17-year-old dumbass. So my first response to this is, I need to go to the movie store and get movies to watch while I'm staying home. And so, like,
Right.
like, like 7 o'clock at night, I
Yeah.
get in my car and drive out into the ice storm up to Hollywood Video to rent a whole bunch of movies to keep myself occupied.
Okay.
And I, at the time, had been working my way through this thing called the cult section at the back of Hollywood Video. Did you have Hollywood Videos in Georgia?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so did yours have this thing, the cult section at the back?
I don't remember, to be
So I
honest. I think my sister had to sneak a lot of horror movies for me when we would go to those things, and I think she kind of selected it for me, so it wasn't like too bad. So I don't honestly remember, but it seems possible. I know we had like sections, so maybe.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so apparently not all the Hollywood Videos had this because
Oh.
when we moved to Texas, the one that I started going to just had horror. It didn't have a cult section,
Oh.
but
Okay.
there was this thing with some Hollywood Videos. They would have the section at the back of the store behind the horror section, and it was called just cult. And it's like this is where they put all the stuff that they weren't sure how to categorize or that they felt
Okay.
maybe could be categorized, but it was maybe a little too intense to sit alongside the other drama films or horror films.
Okay.
And so this is where I first saw Blue Velvet, and this is where I first saw
Oh.
Freaks and Amazon Women on the Moon, Elvira, kind of
Okay.
like weird counterculture, not quite horror, maybe a little bit too dark stuff.
I got
And I had made it my mission to just rent all the movies from the
everything.
cult section and watch them.
Yeah.
It was never in any particular order. There was no rhyme or reason to it. It just I'd go in there on a Friday. What box looks the coolest tonight? Do they have it? Okay, that's coming home with me.
Okay.
And so ice is piling up on my car outside, and there's a good chance I'm going to die driving home. And I'm standing here in the cult section, and this box that I've never really seen before jumps out at me. And
Okay.
it's Shelley Winters, and
Hmm.
she's holding a dead, blood-soaked Elvis impersonator in her arms. And the colors are really lurid. They're kind of pastel colored, kind of
Yeah.
puke colored. You can't really put your finger on it.
Okay.
And the title on it is Heartbreak Motel.
Right.
And I just remember thinking, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And I take it home and I watch it maybe the next day or the day after, I can't remember. And I remember finishing the movie and thinking to myself, what the hell did I just watch?
Yep. Yeah.
It is completely indefensible. It is not a good movie. It is one of the most sordid, awful movies I've ever seen. But at the same time, it's got Shelley Winters in it.
Yeah.
It's got Leslie Uggams in it. It's got the guy who played Lurch in it.
Yeah.
Uh, the script, certain parts of it are kind of well written in places, and then other parts are just like completely awful and dark and sleazy and seedy. And it's just like, where did this come from?
Mm-hmm.
And so I go out online, and I don't think it was Google yet. I think I was still using like maybe like web crawler or Alta Vista or something at this
Yeah.
point, or Yahoo search.
Sure.
And I'm looking this up, and I find out Poor Pretty Eddie is the producer's cut, which one is weird. There was a producer's cut of an exploitation film, but it's the producer's cut of a movie called Poor Pretty Eddie.
Yeah.
And I find this huge write-up on it in a book called Sleazoid Express.
Okay.
And it's a book about 1970s and 80s Times Square. And the book is a travel log of the most prominent grindhouses on 42nd Street the kind of movies that played there, and then like histories of the theaters and the people who went to see them, and then looking at each theater through the most popular types of movies that had played there.
Okay.
And prior to stumbling across this book, which I found because of Poor Pretty Eddie, I had
Mhm.
never heard the word grindhouse. I had never heard the word
Oh, okay.
exploitation movie. I had never heard of 42nd Street. And this just opened my eyes up to this entirely new world. I had seen exploitation movies at that point in my life, but I didn't realize that that's what they
That's
were
what they
called.
were. Yeah.
Yeah. And I order this book and I just devour this thing.
Mhm.
And it completely changed how I watched movies for the next several years. And this is what really turned me on to using some of those VHS networks I talked about before that I had been getting like Japanese cinema from, to
Yeah.
now start looking for exploitation movies, to look for underground horror movies, to look
Yeah.
for stuff like this. And that's what got me interested in that. And I started reading more and more about 70s and 80s 42nd Streets. And then
Mhm.
that became the subject of those short stories that I was writing for my
Mhm.
college's magazine.
Okay.
And then the first book I published, Our Lady of the Inferno, is completely set in Times Square in 1983. And so my entire fiction career is what it is now because I watched this movie and had to research it, and because I found this book, Sleazoid Express.
Mhm.
And Sleazoid Express was written by Bill Landis and his wife Michelle Clifford, and
Oh,
he's
okay.
who I wrote my first nonfiction book about now, a
Right.
biography of Bill's life.
Yeah.
And I literally would not be where I am today as a writer. I would not have the professional life that I do. I wouldn't have the career that I have if I had not rented this movie and
Yeah.
had to look up what it was about, where it came from, and I had not stumbled across Sleazoid Express. That's weird chance rental of this film like ended up setting the stage for the rest of my professional life.
That's crazy. So I'm actually really relieved that you didn't like it. When I watched it, I was like, why is this on his list? Total honesty. Like I was just like, this is I will never watch this again. But I mean I needed to see it. Like as far as like my intrigue, we had talked back and forth about like the concept of what they were doing to films and cutting them and editing them based on the audiences. And I was so intrigued by all of that that I was like, okay. And I saw the cast and I knew several people that were in it, and I was like, okay. And then I watched it and I was like, oh God. Like and then and I guess like, and so it's one of those things where it's like it is influential horror, not favorite, right? So I'm like, so I'm so relieved that you didn't like that movie.
Oh no,
And
it's indefensible.
yeah, it's the movie. So the version that I saw was whatever one is on Tubi, which is I think it did say just Poor Pretty Eddie. I don't think it
Okay,
had
yeah.
so it's what version did you say that was?
That's the original. So
Okay.
that's you probably saw like the very first, like the version that
Okay.
most people on Times Square would have seen.
Okay. Yeah,
And
and I definitely do think there are some moments where like I really did want to like it. Like there were, like so some of the because some of the characters are like almost relatable. Like not quite, but almost. Like you've got the kind of washed up dancer, burlesque, whatever, like, like those kinds of things where like you've seen things like that in other movies and you feel like it's about to be something that you can connect with, and then it just kind of like pulls the rug like right out from under your feet. It was a crazy movie. I think, and I didn't know any of that about the cutting of films and like, changing them based on audiences. Like I didn't know any of that. So all of that was, a learning curve for me. And then I think it kind of encouraged me to read more about it. So I read a couple different things about it, like just articles that I found, and reading like kind of what the story was from the perspective of the people that were in it, and they all thought it was nuts too. Like they weren't. There was no there was no fog. Like they knew exactly what it was. There was no denying what it was, and it's pretty interesting because I know like you had actually shared that like the person who made it was like in adult films right before. And then and it kind of and it, again a bit of a stretch, but it kind of made me think of like another movie that I'll never sit through again, which is Cannibal Holocaust. And the guy that made that was originally in adult filmmaking as well. And so like when he kind of went into that, you're just like, it's just interesting the similarities there, because it was like Cannibal Holocaust is a horrible movie, but there's no denying its impact. Like when you watch that film, like you don't ever forget it. And then I've learned a lot about it over the years after seeing it. And it was just interesting to think about the fact that like he also came from that background and then made this film that made me really uncomfortable. And then this one also made me really uncomfortable. So it's a lot of interesting stuff about it behind the scenes. I love that so many of these have impacted like your whole like because you've got stories from like being a lot younger and like that's crazy. Like I like that like you really did pick things that seriously impacted like
Hmm.
where you are, how you've gotten to these places. I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for taking time to come on the channel. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of people in my life to talk about horror with. So, and because the people in the horror community are all so different in their experiences and what they like and the way they look at things, it's always so interesting to like have conversations like this and hear about people's movies that impacted them, and or even if it's a favorite, it's like that. Those kind of lists are always interesting to hear too. So, I've really loved doing these. I'm definitely going to have to continue to do them, spread out a little more, but definitely like it's been great, like learning, getting to know people, meeting people, and just talking about horror movies and what they are. I love it. It's been awesome. Awesome, awesome. So I really appreciate it. I know it's it'll be, let's see, I have like there's like 10 or 11 of these. So I got really lucky that people wanted to be included. So
Oh, that's
it
really
means a
cool.
lot. So I appreciate it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And if you need any other guests down the road, I can send a couple of people your way.
Yeah, yeah. I'll probably put out a beacon whenever I because these videos are carrying me until the middle of February.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was actually when I originally posted about it, I was really technically only looking for one person, and because I'm like so new, I just didn't think anybody would, reply, and that was a grave mistake because then I got like a lot, and I was, I was talking to my editor, and I was like, we can do this, right? Like, I'll just put a cap of like 10 people, and we can make it work, And he was like, yeah, we'll make it work. So it ended up being really cool. And I've met a lot of really cool people and I've had a lot of really cool conversations. So it's been awesome.
I mean, you never know what podcast is going to take off. I mean, everybody starts out with, one, 200
Yeah.
followers. And then the next thing somebody's got
Yeah.
like 10, 11,000 followers. And I mean, the horror community is so small and so kind of insular that word spreads
Yeah.
easy. So, everything's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
the,
yeah.
the Vanessa Howard thing really showed that to me because I finally ended up, Rue Morgue didn't run it, but this other magazine called Scream, based out of Philadelphia, picked it up.
Okay.
And I wrote it and I figure, okay, like, 30 people are going to read this thing, but at least I got to tell her life story. I at least got to, find out what happened to her. I wrote it, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And I knew that they had distribution in Norway and in the United Kingdom because when I
Okay.
was first pitching it to them, I said, I want to get this to a fairly large audience. And,
Yeah.
I know that's, you're one of the more obscure horror journals. So I'm just curious, what kind of subscribership do you have? And
Yeah.
the guy's like, well, we got the States, we got England, we got Norway. And I'm like, okay, cool. And a couple of months after it runs, some dude like emails me out of the blue and he's like, hey, I got your email from like the editor of Screen Magazine. And I like hang out at Oakley Court in their bar there and I read Scream. And I was like reading this article about Vanessa Howard at the place where this movie was shot. I saw this movie back in the 70s. It's one of my favorite movies. And I always wonder what happened to her. And this dude owns like the British PetSmart. He's like this actual, like insane, rich, crazy dude.
That's
And like
awesome.
that's how I got to see Oakley Court is because this guy was like, now that I know this, like I've got my hands on a print of the movie and I've like rented out the what do you call it? The conference room at Oakley Courts, and I'm
Oh,
going to
okay.
host a screening of the movie there. And I like want you to be there to talk about Vanessa Howard. And this dude
What?
straight up puts me on a plane and flies me to England to talk to like 25 people about Vanessa
About
Howard
this.
because I published this article in this like magazine that I thought nobody was going to read. And I mean, that was an object lesson to me after that. It was like, if an opportunity comes your way, you take it, damn it.
Yeah, that's actually technically that's kind of what happened with this. I hadn't really put myself out there. I'm trying to interact, but I'm like very like social media is kind of like a thing that I don't actually like. I like the interaction. I just don't like the premise. It's frustrating, it's exhausting, and you just never know what's going to work and what's not going to work. But being so new, I'm not used to getting a lot of interaction because it takes time to build up an audience, or even people that want to interact with you, or that, even realize what you're doing. And so, when I did my first one was with Joshua Marcella. He's a horror author in the indie world. And I was like, okay, he's really awesome. Like, and I'm thinking like, this is cool. Like, I'm sure like a few people will pick up on me because he's going to share the video, whatever. Well, then when I was looking for one person, I had kind of just sat in my head about like, I need to put myself out there. Like, I've got to find a way to put myself out in a position to meet other people, to be able to talk to other people, because otherwise I'm not really going to see any growth. Like that's kind of defeats the purpose. And so I did. I finally was like, fuck it. I was like, I'm going to do this. And that's what I did. I put a tweet out, and Josh retweeted it. And then that's what got me these conversations. And it worked for multiple reasons. I'm seeing some growth from it, but I'm also like getting a sense of community that I don't know I expected to have. Like, I kind of expected to just be this person out here floating, doing my thing. And instead it's turned into like supporter, like people who I interact with and I support them and they support me. And it's just been like, I'm just so glad that I sucked it up and just kind of did it, because I was so nervous about not getting any interaction and being bummed about it. And it turned out to be like one of the best decisions I've made so far for the channel, and for myself, like as far as my love for horror, my passion for horror, like it's been really great. So yeah, I've definitely that has definitely changed my mind about just doing it, like reaching out to people, putting it out there, like, and it's been super great for me and for the channel. So I definitely agree. But cool. Well, I won't take up too much more of your night then. Again,
No,
I really appreciate you taking time.
this was a blast. Thank you. No, I love doing stuff like this.
Yeah, no, me too, for sure. We'll have to do it again. We'll come up with something else to talk about. 5 more rant, like, I don't know, we'll come up with something. Okay, cool. Well, thanks. This one goes out, I think, it's going to be the first February one. So it'll be like, I don't remember, the 3rd or something. It's like, it'll be the first Tuesday in February. I'll send you the link when it comes out, of course.
Cool.
So it'll be slightly edited for time on YouTube, and then the full episode will be released on the podcast. So
cool.
Yeah. So cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the evening.
Yeah, thank you. You too. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Yeah. Bye.
Hey guys, thanks a lot for hanging out watching our top 5 influential horror movies. I'm really enjoying doing these episodes. They are a lot of fun, and I am really enjoying the interactions I'm having with other people in the horror community. So I hope you are enjoying watching them as much as I am having them. These episodes will be also listed on our podcast, which will be in the description below. And you can go there to listen to the full episode without the cuts that we had to make for time references for YouTube. And yeah, make sure you circle back. There's going to be 11 episodes total. So make sure you're caught up on all of the ones before and after. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your week and enjoy your weekend. We will see you in the next one.